According to a Fortune.com article that was published on July 15th, 2026, in the first quarter of 2026, the median price of a new single-family home, that's new home construction, cost less than a resale home. This is according to data sent to Fortune by the National Association of Home Builders, and it is very specifically national data. Now, are we experiencing this in Kansas City just yet? Not necessarily, but maybe you've seen a trend starting. If you look around at the periphery of the Kansas City metro area, you will see that we are seeing new home construction start to trend lower in price. And this is a good thing. For years, we have talked about affordability. So today, we are bringing in Will Reuter, the Executive Vice President of the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City, who has been a guest on this podcast plenty of times, to tell us what has changed since the last time we talked to have this new growth of first-time homebuyer entry-level inventory in Kansas City. We're going to talk about some other things too, and Will is a great guest. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm Alex Gehring, and this is Kansas City Real Talk. Will, you have been on the podcast several times, but do you mind taking a second to introduce yourself to the people in case they're a new listener or they haven't been graced with your presence at a sales meeting or otherwise?
First off, I'm just shocked that I continue to be asked back. So I feel like that is a great feeling. So happy to be with you, Alex, and appreciate you letting us borrow some of the audience that you've cultivated over the years. I'm Will Reuter. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Home Builders Association of Greater Kansas City. I am available for rent. I am very cheap. I will come to your sales meeting. I will come to your community meeting. I will come speak at your HOA. I love to talk about all things housing, particularly some of the things that relate to how we add new supply to a market. So my association represents 250 builders and remodelers around the metro. We cover 26 counties in Missouri, 6 counties in Kansas. We're the largest HBA in the country that crosses state lines. So we've got a really cool perspective to share, a lot of variability in the market, but we also represent 350 plus associate members, or those that are not actually building the houses. Your plumbers, electricians, title companies. We're like an industry-specific chamber of commerce, very diverse. And so we try to bring all of those voices together and all of those perspectives together, come up with some mutually agreed upon picture of what the housing production looks like in Kansas City, and then we just take that to the masses. So appreciate the opportunity to share some of that in multimedia form, but we also do make personal appearances.
Well, absolutely, and you have been to several of my sales meetings as well, and it is always a hit with the agents. And the reason why we keep on having you back is because the environment for new home construction continues to evolve, and it's evolving in a positive way, in my opinion. And I think that we've got builders that are feeding the need that we have in Kansas City. So I kind of want to take a look back at like 7 years ago, which I think was probably the first time
ancient
that you
history.
came. Yeah, is that because you've been? We had you on, I think maybe in your first 2 years as CEO. So that would have been 2019,
Yep.
Maybe 2020. Maybe it was your first appearance on the podcast. And I remember having a conversation with you about how we did have a shortage of regional builders. We had a shortage of national builders, and that historically Kansas City really didn't have a whole lot of that because we had such a strong grassroots mom and pop builder environment. What's changed? There's a shift.
There is, and the market is different, and the market is different than it was yesterday, and it's different today than it'll be tomorrow. I mean, I think that's one of the key aspects of the home building market that has not been truly appreciated, is just how rapidly the pace of change has increased. It used to be once upon a time, particularly pre-pandemic, where, a general contractor, a builder would get his pricing sheets from his suppliers, his vendors, his labor in January as to what, things are going to be for the duration of the year. And you could make business decisions based on that one letter for the next 11, 12 months. Well, once you get into this more dynamic environment, those letters, those pricing changes, whether they go up, they rarely go down, sometimes they do. You see those fluctuations. Those are occurring on a weekly basis as opposed to an annual basis. So the ability to respond and the dynamic nature of the industry has created a completely different home building industry than what we've ever known. And so, to your point, with the inclusion of those larger national or regional builders in the market, prior to the arrival of D.R. Horton and Lennar into Kansas City in December of 2023, Kansas City was the largest residential construction market in the country that didn't have a top 50 nationally ranked builder in terms of volume operating in it. Everyone was like, what's going on there? I mean, there's a ton of different factors, obviously. Some of them are consumer related. A lot of them are regulatory in nature. Kansas and Missouri, prior to the adoption of SB 418 in Kansas, were two of only 6 states in the country that didn't have any statewide residential construction standards. So all of the regulatory treatment with what it takes to develop land, to get it built, to get it inspected, to get it approved, that was different when you cross a street. And so, in covering what we cover, 69 different permitting jurisdictions that issue single-family permits, 69 completely different sets of rules. And so that's a regulatory arbitrage for a lot of companies. That's a lot of compliance overhead because the cost of making a mistake is so high. Well, as we've seen the market evolve and building codes be adopted, we've seen a little bit more intention to standardize across jurisdictions. Like they recognize, okay, there may have been value in the past as a city by being completely different than the treatment of new homes, or whether it's the zoning or whatever. Pick your regulatory exposure in home building. There was a value in creating that differentiation because then you could compete, or you thought you could compete for builders. But if they are all completely different, then you're just competing for a very small piece of the pie. It's really hard to get the economies of scope and scale in home building by only operating in 3 or 4 markets. So those markets that were kind of on the outside looking in were like, well, we've got to make it, if not the same, similar here to our neighbor so that maybe these guys will come build some houses over here. So I think some of that effort to standardize the regulation and standardize the process has given a little bit more comfort to some of those larger players. I would also say, too, that the emergence of those players in the space is really a certificate of optimism for the overall market. Because
in Kansas City.
Yeah, in Kansas City. Because those companies don't go to places that you can't make money. And you can't make money in places where you can't get them built, can't get them sold, and can't turn a profit. So if all of those conditions, and they've identified Kansas City as being one of those places, that should be a very encouraging thing for people to say, if these guys are here, that means this place is on the up and up. They don't go to places on the downslide. They go to places on the way up. And so it really, I think, is seen as an advantage that we've got as a market, that we've got these new players entering the space. Is it going to be disruptive? Absolutely, because it's different. It's a change. It's a modification. But at the end of the day, the emergence of new supply being brought on by new players, at the end of the day, the consumer is the end user. And that's who these companies serve. That's who the HBA serves as a conduit through our members. And we're seeing more supply and different supply than what we've seen historically.
Absolutely. And we've been talking about this for years, right? We've been talking for years that we need to figure out standardized codes. We've been talking for years about figuring out affordable housing. And now we actually have new home construction in the 300s in Kansas City again, which we haven't seen in a long, long time. And it's something that somebody can move into. And I mean, it's better than rent, right? It's certainly better than rent. They can build equity in it, and it's strong. Now, one of the things that we hear, I'm curious your thoughts. Do we feel like it's the same quality of construction that we saw the last time homes were in the 300s?
That is very interesting. What we're seeing is, I think, a change more so in the square footage or the layout as opposed to the quality. Because, quality to a degree is very subjective, right?
It is.
So that's a personal application of standard. Whereas the building code is very objective. And all of these homes, regardless of who is building them and what size they are built to the same standard. It's a safety and soundness. It is an energy efficiency. It's a lot of those different things. Those are not things that vary between company because the building code is a baseline. It's a minimum standard. Now, you do see a lot of product that are very different on the upper ends. The more you want to pack into a house, the more features you want to put in. Obviously, there's going to be a corresponding price increase. But I think what we've seen with the size of house has changed. Now, you look at a home, one of those homes that might be priced at $300,000. Somebody goes, well, that can't be more than $200,000. I can't believe that's even $300,000. Well, things have changed dramatically, in the cost of construction. Right. In 2019, 2020, the median new home sales price in Kansas City was around $372,000. Today, that number is north of $480,000.
Right.
So within a 6-year time span, that from starting point to where we are today, that time frame would be in kindergarten and has changed by 6 figures. And so that dramatic increase has led to a response by the industry as to how to deliver on the lower end of the price points. Where's your give? Your give's on square footage. Your give's on layout. Your give is on density. Maybe they're smaller lots. Maybe they're configured differently. So we're seeing the market respond to this historic deterioration in affordability conditions. And the larger players in the space do have that capacity to respond more quickly. So they're the ones that have the ability to bring that to the market, and they're building them and they're getting them sold.
Absolutely. Now in Kansas City, we've got these homes that you can see that are 100 years or more, right? 100 years old or more. These homes that we're seeing that are newer to our market, are they going to be there 100 years from now?
I think they need to be. Just given the amount of land that's still available. The cost of land development, if it was easy to develop on, it's already been developed, is basically where we're at. And so, the ability to just keep going out, adding a new, master plan subdivision, those opportunities are diminishing by the day. And so the value engineering within our construction today does account for the fact that we are not going to build as many homes as we once did. It just not that the buyer market and the upward trajectory of growth for Kansas City wouldn't support it. It's that markets mature. They change over time. There was a time that Prairie Village was greenfield development. Obviously, that was decades ago.
Right.
There's nowhere for them to go out, so they've got to, one, take care of what they've got, and then responsibly replace the things that have gone beyond their useful lives, which is a very...
It's homeownership.
That's exactly right. But it's also a very difficult political exercise as well. So, all of these dynamics play into the notion that the things that we're building need to last a long time. And that's also especially true for a market like Kansas City that continues to grow, continues to attract young people. When you see, places like where I grew up in Western Kansas and economic opportunities being what they are in some of those areas, this is the place that you aspire to.
Right.
But it's also true of Missouri and Oklahoma and Arkansas and Iowa and Nebraska and other points too. So not only are we having to factor for population growth from just what our population would grow by people having babies and families being formed and that domestic population growth, we're also importing population.
Yep.
So we're going to have to emphasize the maintenance of our housing stock in addition to adding new supply.
So well said. Yeah, we can't be putting so much effort toward replacing housing stock when the effort has to be going toward adding housing stock
and
the growth we're experiencing.
And whenever, apply this to any aspect of your life, whether it's your health or your finances or your housing, maintenance in the long run is always going to be cheaper than replacement. So if you take care of your body, practice that preventative medicine, it's going to keep you out of the ER where the costs are a lot higher and the outcome is uncertain. So if we're doing a better job of taking care of things throughout their life cycle, it's going to prolong and extend their life to where it's not going to be as expensive to fix in the future. You look at neighborhoods or portions of the metropolitan area, and there have been places that haven't been touched in decades. And so what is the cost of going in there and redeveloping that?
Right.
It's enormous.
Yeah.
And so that's why they haven't been redeveloped. So you got to start doing those things now because it's as cheap as it's ever going to be today.
Well, and are there, in some of these new developments that we're seeing, am I right that some of the HOA restrictions or the deed restrictions that are on these properties are a little bit less restrictive or have a little bit more ease to them?
Yeah, that's where the market's been trending.
Yeah,
It's especially true. Just something that a lot of people have thought about because they're visible are solar panels.
Sure.
It used to be one of those things where you can't put solar panels on your house if you live in this neighborhood. Right. Well, as new developments come online, there's a lot less fidelity to that notion that the solar panels are going to be disallowed. It's a conversation with the developer. It's a conversation with the broker. It's got to work. You can't just put them. They're not just decorative. They got to make sense from an orientation standpoint, as well as how it's going to be on the back of the house, front of that. All of those things can be factored for, but it's not an outright no like it once was. And you've got 2-car garages instead of 3-car garages or 4-car garages. There again, it's a market-based response to the way that buyers are behaving.
So I guess my question to you is if maintenance is something that we need to be very focused on so that this replenishing of our housing stock, not really replenishing, this growth of our housing stock doesn't decay so that we have to replace it in the future and we can continue to place our efforts on the growth of the housing stock. What do we need to do in terms of homeowner education and making sure that people know how to maintain these houses?
I mean, I tell you what, a lot of the things that you mentioned are probably viewed as aesthetic standards. We want your house to look a certain way, or we want your deck to look a certain way, or your fence.
But it's maintenance.
And it is maintenance, absolutely, because it's not purely what it looks like. Because it's protection,
Absolutely.
right? The new paint is protective, or you discover the wood rot before, you've got a roof that caves in or an eave that falls off, or, you get a raccoon in the ceiling. All of those things happen if you're not paying attention. And, housing has become so complex in the way that we build it, a lot of times through the regulatory requirements of it, that it has created a more hands-on necessity by the homeowner to actually know how to own that house. So much of housing affordability is predicated on the acquisition cost. I'm pre-approved, I've got the financing, there's product available, I've acquired the home. Well, that's when the costs actually kick in, because you got to change filters because there's more mechanical ventilation in housing, especially new housing, than there's ever been. And those filters can run you $200 a pop. Well, is it cheaper to change that filter annually and keep your HVAC system running, or to buy another $20,000 HVAC system when it melts down, or your indoor air quality, all of those things? So it's not only like a consumer education thing. It's a builder education. It's a community education. It may be even an HOA education.
I think it's a realtor education.
It's a societal
Yeah,
education
right.
because there isn't anything that housing doesn't touch.
I agree.
And this is really about protecting your investment. And, housing a lot of times gets kind of diminished to the point where it's only a financial product or only a financial transaction. But man, this is the places we're raising our kids. and this is a place where we're celebrating birthday parties and celebrating life's triumphs and lows. So there's that emotional connection to it. So I wonder if we're just like, hey, if you don't do this, then it's going to cost you X amount of dollars in 10 years. Well, that's 10 years down the line. I'm busy today. I'm not going to think about that. But if you say, this is going to prolong your enjoyment and your emotional investment in this place to allow you to not have to worry about this stuff. If you just do these simple things today, this house is going to be something that your kids and grandkids can live into. So I don't know if there's a way to not lose sight of the financial aspect, but also bring in that emotional aspect.
So, Will, we've talked a lot about the kind of entry level new home construction that we're seeing that's kind of new in Kansas City, and this whole discussion about about homeownership and the importance of maintenance and all of that has me thinking about some things that we're seeing in the market right now with builders experiencing some litigation. Can you speak a little bit to how some of this translates to the upper echelon of price and the luxury bracket? How do we make sure that people understand home maintenance is important at all levels? And just because you buy a more expensive home doesn't mean that you the R factor might be really high in that home. You might have spent a lot of money to make sure that the R factor is outrageously high, but also that means you maybe need to pay attention to the fact that you don't have much ventilation and there might be microbial growth. Should that be something that is the builder's responsibility or the realtor's responsibility? What does this look like?
It's everybody's responsibility. Everybody involved in the transaction. I'll say that litigation is apparent and evident in every industry. So some of the things that we see today related to this suit or that suit or this countersuit or that countersuit, it's something that's always occurred. That's just the nature of it. And I think it's particularly true or at least enhanced because of the cost of housing today. It's such a huge financial investment to lay out that much of someone's hard-earned money to acquire something that they've dreamed about for a long time. And when you talk about where that responsibility lies, it kind of goes back to the complexity of the overall structure that you're acquiring or that you're living in. These things aren't just four walls and a roof and it looks super simple. These are complex machines in a lot of ways, and it all works together. And when you are ultimately acquiring one of these machines, you become the machine's operator. And how you operate that machine, absent the manufacturer, is going to dictate whether or not this thing is going to be successful long term. You roll a new car off the lot and you don't change the oil in it, and then you want to go and sue Ford Motor Company because your F-150 is broken down, but you didn't change the oil in 40,000 miles. How was that Ford's issue? Right. So I don't want to say that everything that is produced is perfect, because it's certainly not. As long as human beings are buying and selling houses and human beings are the ones involved in it,
That's right.
There is going to be things that have to be solved for. But to a certain degree, there's really no such thing as a truly turnkey solution to one's housing circumstances anymore. There's always going to be some incumbent requirement for the occupant of a domicile to say, this is where my responsibilities have begun because this is where these responsibilities have ended. And the cost of making a mistake now is enormous. Again, because of the cost of everything, let alone housing. So, our encouragement is always, you just can't assume anymore. And, remember when, we were in school, or I don't know. I went to Catholic school, so there were stupid questions. But you would say, you would say, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right?
Right.
Well, there really isn't when it comes to housing. Ask it. Don't assume. because if you're curious as to whether or not the way that you're doing something or the way that you want to do something is going to be, is that going to be absorbed by your house in a good way? You need to know those things and to figure that out. Don't just say, well, I'm going to do what I want to do and the consequences are what they are. You can't do that when you're talking about the place where all your stuff is, where the people that you love sleep, and that you've laid out a lot of cash for. So again, this is not to put all of the responsibility on any one party. This is a shared responsibility amongst all of the parties involved to ensure that everyone gets what they need at the conclusion of the engagement. So, it sounds kind of flippant to say, but contracts matter. I know KCRAR is all in on that stuff,
right.
and consumers should be more all in on contracts than what they have historically been. I get it. No one loves to read legalese, but at the end of the day, that's protecting them and it's protecting you and everybody that's involved in it. So why not get it all laid out, understand it, do the homework, and make sure that says what you think it says, not what you want it to say.
Absolutely. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the success, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that some of these new developments in that lower entry-level price bracket that we've been talking about, I think that some of those developments were built on land that was developed using the Rural Housing Incentive District through the Kansas, which is a state program,
Correct.
which was something that I know Kansas Realtors had championed the expansion of, so that more of our communities locally could benefit from it. I know that that's something that you guys were supportive of as well. One of the pushbacks, because I attended some of those meetings to get these approved, and almost every single time you would hear somebody say something along the lines of, how do we make sure that the developer actually passes on the savings to the consumer? I think they did. I think that the savings have been passed on to the consumer, which I think is really remarkable. I guess what I'm trying to figure out, well, first of all, why don't we, can you speak a little bit to how the RHID program worked, and what that is and how it benefits the developer, the builder, and the eventual buyer?
Yeah, so the RHID program, for years, the R stood for rural. So Rural Housing Investment District. And so it was really out of sight and out of mind for our area of the world because it was defined by eligibility based on population caps. And it was like 60,000 people in the county. So obviously we've got multiple cities within Johnson County or in all of these counties that would exceed that. So that means everybody in the county can't do it. Well, what the state legislature did was it got rid of the county caps and it went city by city and put a different cap in place. And what that program allows for is a legal pathway for a developer to utilize the infrastructure costs that they put into a development to count against in their favor towards their tax liability to the state. What does that mean? It means that they can acquire materials and do the actual labor to do the installation of infrastructure. And when I say that, I mean curbs, gutters, water, sewer, electric utilities, all of those things.
And you said earlier that if it could have been purchased and developed easily, it would have already been
done. Absolutely.
So this is land that couldn't be developed cheaply.
It's either going to be sitting fallow or someone's going to buy that and put one house on it. And is that the best use of the land given its proximity? Maybe for some places, maybe not for others. What this does is it requires the municipality to establish an RHID district within their city just for those defined parameters. So it's not like, okay, this city adopted this policy, so you can go do this anywhere within the city. No, it's got to have a defined geographic portion of the community where you can go in and do that. And so what does that result in is a lower lot cost of production. And at the end of the day, particularly in the Kansas City market, your lot cost accounts for between 18 and 22% of the final purchase price that a consumer sees. So if the average lot cost in Johnson County is at or north of $150,000, which is what we're seeing today, that means you're not building anything less than $600,000, $700,000, which is exactly what we're seeing in a lot of places. That's the starting point. And RHID is designed to get that lot cost down, that number down, so that you can afford to put something $300,000 or $400,000 on that piece of dirt. And it has been successful in a lot of other places in Kansas. It just had never been allowed here, and now we're starting to see it pop up. And it is not the solution, but it is a tool that can be accessed to make some of these things happen. So we're seeing townhome developments in Edwardsville and some single family product kind of all around the periphery of the metro on the Kansas side. And so we're starting to see finally some of these policy responses to this housing affordability crisis question, however you want to characterize it. Everyone's talking about it.
That's right.
And now you're seeing some action being taken. Now, I always want to set expectations with people is that we don't have the housing market we have today because of one decision that got made yesterday, right? It's an aggregate of policy decisions made maybe independent of one another over the last 100 years.
Right.
So is there going to be one solution that all of a sudden unleashes or unlocks housing affordability? No. We're in the improvement game right now of housing circumstances. So let's make some solid financial and regulatory improvements, and we're going to start to see better product, more diverse product, more diversely priced product entering the market. And so that's the evidence that we're seeing today is that that policy was modified, I believe, 2 years ago. And the fact that we're already seeing housing related to that expansion of that program is actually kind of a miracle when it comes to housing
really
policy
is.
change. So usually the surprises are always negative when it comes to housing regulation changes. You're usually unpleasantly surprised, but I think this has really shown that, hey, these tools can be thought of in a different way that is still very respectful of the taxpayer, very respectful of the community, and ultimately very respectful of the home buyer or the consumer, and everybody's getting something out of it.
Because this isn't a situation where we lower the cost to develop and then the buyer pays specials.
Right.
There's no specials that are attached to it or anything like that as far
That's
as
a different thing. That's a special
That's
benefit
totally
district,
different.
right? Yep.
This is so it truly is a benefit. But the benefits don't stop there. Now I feel like I'm selling something. I'm not trying to sell anything, but I want to talk through this because it really is kind of remarkable what's happening. You know, we are seeing these like $330,000 homes that are being put up, and not only is that already a price that's difficult to find. It's difficult to find in resale. That's not exclusive to new home construction. It's hard to find in resale. But then we're seeing financial institutions that are sometimes owned by the builders themselves that are able to offer a 30-year note for 4.9%. And in an environment, just today, and I know this is coming out in a couple of weeks, but just today we had the Fed meeting and we had there were three people that voted to increase rates. They didn't increase, but you know
they wanted to.
And now we're kind of projecting that we will see maybe an increase on the Fed rate, which I know isn't specific to mortgage rates, but neither here nor there. It's all tied together. I mean, 4.9% on a $330,000 house. That's an unbelievably low monthly cost compared to what we have been seeing for new home construction and even for resale. It's very impressive. You know, when you're thinking, we've been talking about housing affordability for so long, and then we've got land being acquired and developed using rural housing investment districts that lower the cost of development. That lowered cost of development gets probably not entirely, but mostly passed on to the buyer. The cost of construction is lower. The cost of financing for the buyer is lower. In some cases, the closing costs are being completely paid for. And frankly, it does seem like it's a little bit of an answer to what we've all been talking about. That said, you have people who are looking at that situation, and maybe they bought a house and it wasn't that type of a setup for them 3 or 4 years ago, and it's time to move. And they're competing against that product now, and they don't have access or the ability to provide 4.9% financing to their buyer. There's a lot that they maybe need to do to compete.
Yeah.
Now, this might be a temporary pain point, right? We're going to get through this. Obviously, it's important that we have additional housing. But what would you say to, I'm not trying to imply that it's your fault in any way, by the way. But
I wish I had that power.
Yeah, I know. What would you say to a seller who's experiencing that right now?
I would say to make sure you're not holding yourself to an inaccurate standard as to how long it's going to take you to sell your home, or to what you think it was perhaps once worth, or what it could be worth based on just this completely ahistorical housing market that we've been in. You know, it's my neighbor sold their house 6 months ago for this, so I'm definitely going to get that for mine. My floors are nicer than theirs. Well, you know, we're involved in the Strait of Hormuz right now, and there's a lot of things that are different than they once were, which has changed consumer confidence and has changed tastes or ability to pay or whatever it might be. Things change so dramatically. So, you know, that's why I always tell people, you got to work with an expert that's got their finger on the pulse of the day to day to make sure you get that thing accurately priced and expectations appropriately managed. So I can't sit here and say that I would ever condone or support a worldview that would prevent competition from entering the market, right?
Of course.
Because we are starving for supply. We are a chronically underbuilt market, always have been. You know, we're adding between 7,000 and 8,000 new households in the metro every single year, and we're starting right at 4,000 houses. There's an imbalance that exists, and we're not adding 3,000 apartment units.
Yeah.
So we're behind. So the people are coming. The metro is growing. What do they say? It's all about timing and accuracy. That's where we're at. So we have to update our expectations and update dial in the accuracy of our assumptions about what might be possible. But the truth of the matter is if there was ever a situation where someone would say, I've got this product, I'm going to go out and make sure I've got no competition so that I can sell it for what I want, that's not going to be met with open arms in the general public.
No.
And we've got the polling data that would suggest
Of course,
that.
yeah.
You know, what business person wouldn't love to be able to cast a vote to make sure their competitors never get to market? That's not the way that these things work. And the fact of the matter is that housing has been a supply-strained commodity for generations.
Yes.
And we are at the point now where there are new methods, materials, capabilities, financial tools, players in the space with different capacities that are going to contribute to an improvement of housing supply. At the end of the day, that may not be as beneficial household by household, block by block, but it will result in a much more resilient and growing economy, which is going to lift all of those boats.
100%. And hopefully that's clear to everybody. You know, you just know that you've got agents that
vote
are
with your own
representing
wallet.
these people. That's right. And they're frustrated. Well, you know what? To your point, what we've experienced over the last several years is it's bonkers.
I mean, we went as a market, you know, we did, I believe there were 12,000 single family permits pulled in 2005. And by 2008, it was less than 3,000. Mm-hmm. And that never truly recovered. The rest of the country post-recession recovered to about 72% of its pre-recession permitting activity. Kansas City's highest point during the pandemic was 51%. Wow. So we just never recovered as a home building industry to the degree that the rest of the country did. And so we are so far behind. And will we ever dig ourselves out of the hole? It's hard to see how that is, but we can make things better. And there is more supply. There's more diverse supply coming online all the time. And now is not the time to say, hey, I'm all for that new development being approved as soon as I get to close on this bad boy.
That's right. There you go. There you go. Well, one of the things that we've talked a lot about previously, Will, is labor in Kansas City. And I know that we've talked previously about some trade school and trade development. I'm curious what the labor market is looking like for builders, and if that is as much of a constraint as it was previously, or if it's been alleviated a little bit. What's the situation with labor, construction labor specifically, in the Kansas City market?
I tell you what, we are seeing so many cool things happening in the labor market. And it's not necessarily because there are so many more people seeking out professions in the trades or more people on the job sites. What we're seeing is kind of a renaissance amongst the younger generation about having a pathway to entrepreneurship. The studies that we've seen and conducted demonstrate that Gen Z is one of the more entrepreneurial-minded generations that we've seen in a while. They don't aspire to the W-2 like Gen X or even older millennials did, that they want to be their own boss. And the fact that the pathway to entrepreneurship, the fastest one that exists in the American economy today, is through transferable skills that can't be easily mechanized. And that is the trades. And so today, under construction right now, is the largest workforce training center in the Midwest up in Platte County.
Really?
The Northland Career Center.
I didn't know this.
And it is, I'm going to get this number incorrect because the cost of construction has gone up, but it is north of $60 million in construction costs to build this facility. And they had to build it so big because the demand is there. These are things that you got to recognize. The computers can do a lot, but they can't climb a ladder or swing a hammer. And that's still how things get built in this country. Yeah. And so we're seeing that younger generation gravitate towards those opportunities. And what has not occurred in the past that is occurring now is that the communities and the school districts are actually responding to it favorably. Rather than saying, nope, this is just a phase. We got to get people back into 4-year college. We need to be in PhD pursuit. We're not saying any of those things are bad, but now they're leaning into it saying, if this is the way that the young people want to be guided and the opportunities, by God, we're going to present it to them. And so the Olathe Area Technical Center, to give a Kansas example, is on their third facility since I joined the HBA 7 years ago because they keep outgrowing it. Because they got too many young people that want to get in there and figure out what they want to do with their lives. So there's an energy, there's a momentum in the trades.
Has it translated to true labor force for builders yet?
So yes is the answer to that. It is pipeline that has been laid and is actually flowing product.
Fantastic.
The issue is we're so far behind. Right? So how long is it going to take to see that measurable impact? We talk about, missing middle housing, right? That's the terminology that gets used for the stuff that isn't the high-end luxury stuff and the stuff that isn't subsidized, right? So it's the stuff in the middle, your $300,000 to $500,000 product, which has always been more historically difficult to build. I gave the example earlier of the fact that we went from 12,000 to 3,000 starts within a relatively small period of time. Well, there's a lot of houses that went unpermitted and unbuilt in that time, and even through that 51% recovery post-recession that I talked about. So when my family moved to Kansas City in 2018, We bought a house that was built in 1998. It was a 20-year house. Somebody that's moving to Kansas City today or wanting to look for a house today that's looking for a 20-year-old house that could be that first-time home buyer or maybe second step-up house finds themselves with a lot fewer options because that 20-year-old product didn't get built 20 years ago. So there's a missing middle just because of the lack of housing that got built. I got lucky. Again, timing is everything. But that same thing happened in the labor market. Is you go to a job site and you see a predominance of older workers and super young workers. And there's like two missing generations of people on the job site. It's because that recession that occurred 15, 16 years ago never truly healed, but it was also really long. It wasn't a 6, 12, or 18-month cycle. It was a 4-year cycle. Well, a lot of those folks went out and drove trucks or went to welding school and went and welded pipelines. They went and did a lot of other things, and they never came back to residential construction. And so you've got a missing middle within your labor supply in the same way that you've got a missing middle in your housing supply.
Well, one of the things that I know that the HBA is supporting as a new issue is Construction Suicide Prevention Week. Talk to us a little bit about Construction Suicide Prevention Week, and how did it come to be?
Yeah.
And is it specific to Kansas City, or is it a national endeavor? What is this?
This is very much a national effort, and it was born out of the fact that construction has the second highest rate of suicide in any industry in the United States. It is a tragic set of circumstances that has a very wide ripple effect. This is not one of those efforts that is, that an HBA takes on that is financial or economically driven. This is as close as we're going to come to literally improving life or death circumstances for people. And so this is a really heavy topic. And the thing is it is life or death. And for a lot of people in Kansas City and all over, the absence of a venue in which to address these topics or talk about these topics has led us to where we are. So what Construction Suicide Prevention Week is, and that will be September 14th through the 18th in 2026. So there's a website, constructionsuicideprevention.com, that's got a lot of resources. Our own Carrie English, who is our Vice President of Communications at the HBA, serves on the National Board of Directors for this effort. And it's about doing safety stand downs, moments of silence for those that we know that have been lost. Just creating an environment where somebody who's having a tough time can feel that they are not weak for having a tough time. Mm-hmm. We know that some of the circumstances surrounding suicide are financially related. Someone's got difficulty paying their bills, or just the pressures of the world are on them. To know that there is an organization that recognizes that, is fighting for them to be able to go out there and make things happen, that there are opportunities to get that help or someone to talk to, so that you've got a light at the end of the tunnel. And we've done a staff training on what we can do to identify or otherwise serve as a resource for people. And it's really just, again, breaking down the facade that this vulnerability is weakness. This vulnerability is actually strength. The ability to say, I'm struggling, I don't know how to get out from underneath this weight, and I need to talk to somebody. Well, buddy, come talk to me, and we're gonna figure it out. There are hotlines, there are resources, there are counselors. All of those things are available. You don't have to worry about your reputation. You don't have to worry about your masculinity or your femininity or whatever it is that society has conditioned people to think is the way that you should operate. The big tough guy or tough gal persona, throw it out the window because the world is better with you in it. And let's figure out what resources, what support that you need. And really, it's just about being available to people, to not shutting down the conversation if a comment is made or if a perspective is shared that you might think, well, that was really weird. Well, moving on, let's embrace it. Hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee, or, how are you? And actually mean it. Are you really? Mm-hmm. Okay. Because didn't seem like it, but I'm going to give you your space. Just these soft touch things. We know the people in our lives better than sometimes they know themselves. And we recognize those behavioral changes. Make yourself available that they feel safe being vulnerable around you, and get your arms around them and allow them to put their arms around you. And let's make this a much less frequent occurrence in our industry, in our society. It happens, unfortunately, all the time. I get those phone calls with semi-regularity that this individual or that individual that this has occurred, and it tears you apart, breaks you apart.
And those are calls about Kansas City,
sure,
specifically
yes,
within our community.
Yes, it occurs right here. It's not some amorphous, distant thing. Right. It's happening right in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our churches, in our schools, all over, and on our job sites. So these are things that can't ever be fully solved for. We're not asking people to all become amateur therapists. That's not what this is about. This is about checking in on your people and allowing people to check in with you, to just be that. If someone is bringing up something out of character, they're throwing out a lifeline. It's a call for help, but they don't know how to ask for it. So if you are available, if you are open, and you are able to be empathetic, that just might save a life. And if it can save one, we got to try it. We got to do it. So that's what we're about with Construction Suicide Prevention Week, is creating an environment of awareness and the ability for people to feel like they're being seen and heard, and that they are loved and they're needed and they're necessary. And this industry, this community, it's better off with you in it. So let's work together to get there.
Well, Will, just like with everything that I ever talk to you about, I can see your passion for this. I can see your passion for Kansas City, for the community, and for your members. You're a wonderful partner to the association, and just really appreciate you coming here today, sharing everything that you shared, sharing information about Construction Suicide Prevention Week. Just a real pleasure to talk to you, and thank you.
Alex, it's really my pleasure. I immensely appreciate all the things that KCRAR does on a daily basis to educate its members, to interact with the public, to just continue talking about all of these topics that have such a huge impact on our exceptional quality of life in this community. So you're a great spokesman for the industry, and whether or not you've been named officially a spokesperson for the industry, I think you're recognized as one. So we're setting precedent, but appreciate again all that you and Kip and the entire team do to partner in making all these things happen, because it takes more than one organization to make a housing ecosystem work, in the same way that it takes more than two people to create a community.
Absolutely. Will, thank you so much.
You bet. Awesome. Thanks, Alex.